is Ira Guterman. I'm the Manager of Programs and Operations here at ISGAP. And I want to thank you all for being here today. I have a really important lecture and even more timely with it being International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I should mention that ISGAP recently published a new book, the ISGAP Papers, which is a collaboration of many of the seminars similar to today's. If you're interested, you can find them on Amazon, the ISGAP Papers. So for today's lecture, we have the pleasure of welcoming David Bedein. He's an MSW community organizer and investigative journalist. In 1987, Bedein established the Israel Resource News Agency, Agron, to accompany foreign journalists in their coverage of Israel to balance the media lobbies established by the PLO and their allies. Mr. Bedein has reported for news outlets such as CNN Radio, Makor Rishon, Philadelphia Inquirer, and many others. For 4 years, Mr. Bedein acted as the Middle East correspondent for the Philadelphia Bulletin, writing over 1,000 articles until the newspaper ceased operation in 2010. He has covered breaking Middle East negotiations in Oslo, Ottawa, Shepherdstown, and many others. Bedein has overseen investigative studies of the Palestinian Authority, the expulsion process from Gush Katif and Samara, and many other places. Since 2005, he has also served as the director of the Center for Near East Policy Research. The focus of the Center's investigations is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. In that context, Bedein authored Roadblock to Peace, How the UN Perpetuates the Arab-Israeli Conflict, and UNRWA Policies Reconsidered, which caps Bedein's 28 years of investigations of the record.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today. Wink when you're ready. Okay. Good afternoon. This is David Bedein. I have been in Israel almost 47 years now. And for the last 29 years, I've been running news investigations of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. The only agency in the world whose purpose is to perpetuate the suffering of refugees in the indignity of refugee camps. That's where my social work degree comes in. My original ambition when I came to Israel 47 years ago was to work as a social worker in the process of resettlement and rehabilitation of Arab refugees. Unfortunately and tragically, these people have been used, and the two Palestinian Arabs on our staff see this as a clear violation of their civil liberties and human rights, being confined to refugee camps under false pretenses. A few administrative items. I have here a sign-up list of two copies of it. If you'd like to be on our website, get our as of February 1st. Our website will be celebrating 20 years of operation. The name of the website is israelbehindthenews.com. As professionals, we hire people, journalists, who will provide facts and documentation. The requirement to work on the UNRWA project is a fluency in Arabic. I'm pleased to see the two friends from Israel here today. One is a colleague and kind of a mentor of mine, Dr. Mordechai Kedar, and a journalist, Ben-Dror Yamini, who is a very popular, important investigative column in the newspaper Yediot Achronot, who's been covering this issue with a lot of passion for many years. The reason for this discussion and the connection with this institute is because we didn't intend to find it, but by purchasing all of the school books of the Palestinian Authority that are used in UNRWA today, we have discerned the focus of their curriculum to be genocidal. The fact that this is not on the agenda of what's happening today, in the next few days, in Holocaust Remembrance Day at the United Nations, is a major oversight. We might call this politically correct genocide if I were to be humorous, but it's not humorous. The fact that in the past year, there have been more than 40 people murdered and premeditated acts of murder, and every act is praised in the official media of the Palestinian Authority. But more important, even than that, is a school system which is based on something else. If someone can, I just want to show you, first of all, we were the first agency to purchase the new school books of the Palestinian Authority that are being used in UNRWA. Now I have here a summary, an executive summary. We have to, if anyone gives us a contribution, I can give it to you. There's expenses involved. Basically, there's also a contribution card, people who want to be involved as sponsors of our agency. Fine, we're privately supported. The reason why we wanted to see the school books was because I had an interview with Yasser Arafat in 1996, in which he said that after understanding pressure he had from the government of Israel, from other foreign governments, and by the way, UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, does not receive money in its operating budget from the United Nations. Where does it receive its money? From the donor countries. 68 donor countries, 20 of whom give a substantive amount of money. The United States government provides 1/3 of the budget. So we have a United Nations agency which has adopted the PA, Palestinian Authority curriculum. And I asked Arafat about the curriculum. He said it's going to be a curriculum for peace. So I took him at his word. He gave me and my staff the authorization to buy the school books from the Minister of Education of the Palestinian Authority. It leads to a humorous moment after meeting with the minister, whose name was Naim Abu Hummus, quite a name. After Abu Hummus gave me the permission to go to all the school book stores that were coming out, people thought I was working for Arafat, with a letter from Arafat. So my wife said, maybe this time you'll make a good living. Anyway, going to all the school book stores, purchasing the school books, we brought them back to Jerusalem. At that time, the Israel Minister of Foreign Affairs didn't want to see them. That was Shlomo Ben-Ami. But at the time, and something that I actually got from the American Jewish Committee 40 years ago, when I was doing my social work degree, I was involved with interfaith dialogue with the Pope's ambassador, the Honorable, the Excellency Archbishop Sambi, Pietro Sambi, who has passed away a few years ago. And the Archbishop called me while I was in the taxi coming back from Ramallah. Would I bring him the school books? He called me on the cell phone. I said, humorously, who am I to refuse a papal cell phone request? So I brought it to him after I had an extra set because the foreign ministry at the time didn't want to see them. And the Pope, he asked, I said, why, in confidence, why do you want to see them? He said, because Pope John Paul II, when he came to an UNRWA school in March 2000, he was shocked to hear the screaming of the children, Itbach El Yehud, kill the Jews. And he saw...
Slaughter the Jews. Slaughter the Jews.
Slaughter the Jews.
There's no mic.
Slaughter the Jews. Itbach El Yehud. And he wanted to know who was... The Pope asked, what are they learning in their schools? What are they learning in their day-to-day schools? So he asked the Pope's ambassador to get him a copy of the books. Well, Arafat wouldn't give it to him, the Israeli government, so I did. And the Pope initiated the first translations of the new school books. And the Pope determined at the time, Pope John Paul II, that these are manuals of war. And for the next 9 years, our agency put out translations of the school books. I'm proud to say the American Jewish Committee took those translations and helped distribute them. I don't know if they carried out press conferences, but they at least put them out. It's on their website. But people were saying, oh, it's not what they're really not using the school books. So we embarked on a project 7 or 8 years ago to film the schools. and film all their activities. So what I'd like to do now is show a few selections from our coverage. You can see all 16 short films on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, and we're making a new film based on the UNRWA military parades, which took place on January 1st of this year, only less than a month ago, on the anniversary of the founding of the Fatah, the PLO. Military parades in schools with United Nations emblems on them, financed primarily by the United States and other Western democracies. And the dramatic thing about today's presentation is that just before flying over from Israel, the new military training programs in the UNRWA schools in Gaza were handed to us. So I'm going to show you a few selections, unedited footage, and you're the first people to see it. But first, let me put things in context. And let's take a look at a 3-minute summary. Someone were to show me how to do this.
Should we close the lights?
Yeah, well, first we have to know how to focus on it. Somebody can give me some technical support here.
Hit it twice.
Now that's not the whole story. UNRWA has also appointed a youth ambassador to go around the world. No, not this one. Go back to this one. go around the world and promote. Okay, to go around the world and promote the message of UNRWA, a youth ambassador whose fees are financed through the United States government. I personally brought this to the attention with my staff. All my staff are Arabic speaking, 2 Arabs and 2 Jews. We showed this at the US Congress last year, and also to representatives of the US State Department, to which we got no response. So you'll see their youth ambassador and the message he gives around the world. So let's take a look at what their youth ambassador is.
The UNRWA slogan is "Peace starts here." A more appropriate definition might be "War starts with UNRWA." One of UNRWA's newest employees is Mohammed Asaf, a singer from Gaza whose mother taught in UNRWA schools. Asaf is now UNRWA's official youth ambassador.
I have received in this room heads of state,
Make
prime
louder.
ministers, many important people, but I have never seen so much expectation here.
Even though his songs repeatedly praise martyrs and violence, he was still hired by the United Nations and is now the public face of UNRWA. Hired to promote peace, Asaf seems determined to do the opposite. His latest song, released during the Gaza war, encourages martyrdom, jihad, and a Palestinian state that replaces all of Israel.
That clip was taken off of the UNRWA website with their translations and our commentary that we added to it. I want to be very clear in terms of what's going on here. Let's go back to our next one. Now, one of the things that UNRWA has done in cooperation with Hamas is to organize military training in their schools. You'll see in our books that we put out, and also in our it's all on our website. We have gotten all the material from the inside the classrooms, where the children from their Facebook pages, the records of their what they call al-Kutla clubs. People who know Hebrew know the word ketel, murder. It's basically murder clubs. Mordechai and Moti, how would you translate al-Kutla?
Gush.
Okay, it's a group of people, a crystallized group of people involved with murder and in their classrooms. Now, how do they get people involved? Now, first of all, a little background. We were the agency that 14 years ago discovered through our research that Hamas, the Hamas terrorist organization, had taken over the UNRWA School Teachers Association and the UNRWA Workers Association, so that any charitable funds coming to UNRWA in Gaza would go through the hands of Hamas. At the time, the UNRWA budget was $400 million. Today, it's $1.2 billion, times 3. Now, the Canadian government, as a result, pulled out of UNRWA, out of the UNRWA General Fund. No other country did. However, the United States Congress, after seeing this material, seeing the evidence that UNRWA had been taken over by Hamas, passed very clear laws, which have been on the books since 2003, since we sent our delegates there to Congress. It made it illegal for any U.S. funds to reach UNRWA so long as UNRWA was maintaining its alliance with Hamas. And until 10 days ago, until January 20th of this year, this was the situation of the U.S. government's attitude. But let's take a look at what they do, how they recruit the children, and you'll see also some of the new footage that we got just 3 days ago, and now we're raising money to produce the new film, a new film, which we will show in the United States Congress, in the European Union, which gives 1/3 of the budget to UNRWA also, in the Canadian government, the Canadian Parliament, the British Parliament and the Swedish Parliament. They've all asked us to bring our material. But let's take a look at how they recruit the children. This one, here. This is from UNRWA television. All with U.S. tax dollars. Now let's take a look at the new footage, unedited, handed to our office. Our staff brought it in from Gaza, unedited, of the children going through their military training. They do this after school hours in UNRWA. In the previous film we have called UNRWA Goes to War. The UNRWA Army, the Children's Army of Hamas. Excuse me. We interview the leaders of UNRWA who thank. We interview the leaders of Hamas who thank UNRWA for facilitating the participation of the children in their military activities. The children go from age 9 to 16. This is in the area formerly known as Gush Katif.
بعاود ادخله لقدام برجعه بقعد وين في مكان ايوه
Okay, you'll see here the complement of films that we have on our site, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, and I'm going to show one short film called Inside the UNRWA Classroom, which we showed this in Congress. I want you to see it, very important. If there had been change, it would have been nice. So things have only deteriorated. There's no country in the world willing to deal with this issue. Our agency sent a letter to every major Jewish organization would you ask the United States government to please condition aid to UNRWA on a cessation of this kind of activity? Not one organization had the politeness to respond. Therefore, we're here today and not over there at the UN. And I thank Charles Small and Ira for welcoming us. You have no idea what we've been through to try to make this into an issue. I want to dedicate a minute to Robert Wistrich, the memory of my friend Dr. Robert Wistrich, one of my mentors at Hebrew University. I had the last conversation with him before he died unexpectedly almost 2 years ago. He was getting on a plane to Rome to show the Italian Parliament the school books, our material. Now the Italians had cut off aid to UNRWA and to the PA education at the request of the Pope in 2000. Now there was talk about renewing it. And Dr. Wistrich, one of the great experts on anti-Semitism and on Nazi Germany, he looked at this material, and again, I make this available, and we're looking for sponsors so we can put out the full translations of all the school books. And Dr. Wistrich's response, when he looked at our material, these were his last comments. He got on the plane and unfortunately died in Italy when he got off the plane, where he looked at this and said, he has been a scholar of Nazi Germany for 40 years. And he wanted to say that the school books used in Nazi Germany only hinted at the murder of the Jews. This is no hint. There is no, we say in Hebrew, busha. There is no embarrassment of the fact that there's school books which are dedicated to the war against the Jews. But people ask me, why don't you put out material which is pro-peace? That was my original orientation, those people who know me from a previous generation. So when we went to Berzeit University, where the Paris Center for Peace has been working with them to develop a curriculum, they said it was, oh, here's the curriculum, however, it's been vetoed by the Palestinian Authority. There is a curriculum for peace, so they're not lying. And as Mr. Paris said to me, well, I know. Well, so what are you doing about it? Well, Mr. Paris has meanwhile passed away. And his legacy, the legacy of the Paris Center is to tell everyone there's a peace curriculum, except it has been vetoed. It would be my honor and pleasure to put out a peace curriculum of the PA, except it has been vetoed. I say it 3 times. I want you to now have some insight into the schools. And again, the schools have no problem being filmed. They have a pride in what they're teaching. That's not the problem. The problem is getting Jews to listen, getting Jews to work with us, to sponsor this work, to get it out. And that is our goal. The expression I like to use is, let my people know. I dream that one day we will be invited to the United Nations when they have a Holocaust Remembrance Day to talk about the promotion of the Holocaust. Incidentally, there's one nation in the world that has a curriculum which praises the mass murder of the Jews in World War II. That is Syria. And as Syrians come to the West, my colleagues will tell you that the word for migration and the word for invasion are quite similar, if not the same. When they come here and they play the game of refugees, understand what their orientation is. Now let's sit back and watch a few minutes of Inside the UNRWA Classroom, please. Thank you.
UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, has received billions in funds from Western democratic nations. It was created in 1949 as an emergency response to 500,000 Arabs who left their homes in the wake of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. UNRWA spends about half of its budget each year, more than $500 million, on schools. It has a massive payroll, employing more than 10,000 teachers. UNRWA does not produce its own textbooks. Instead, it uses the texts of the host entity. In Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza Strip, It uses new textbooks published by the Palestinian Authority. There are other UN agencies that serve descendants of refugees, yet UNRWA is the only agency that promotes the right of return to homes and villages that no longer exist. This can be seen daily in their schools. This is how an UNRWA elementary school class begins its morning. Inside the classroom, the right of return is the centerpiece of UNRWA education. Teachers instill this mantra that pupils have the right and responsibility to take back homes and villages that may or may not have belonged to their grandparents. Listen to UNRWA students and educators describe how the right of return is taught in the classroom.
ثقافة حق العودة أكيد نركز عليها كثيرا، وهذا هو جزء من ثقافة مناهجنا الدراسية. نعطيهم ونوصل هاي المعلومات لطلابنا في مدارسنا عن طريق مواد التربية المدنية والتربية الوطنية.
احنا بندرس عن المخيمات الفلسطينية، والمخيم مكان أقيم للاجئين الفلسطينيين الذين أجبروا على الرحيل عن مدنهم وقراهم في فلسطين، وهم مصممون على العودة إليها. احنا بدنا نرجع على أرضنا، هم اغتصبونا إن احنا نروح عنهم.
تبين هذه الخاطئة المدن والقرى الفلسطينية بداية من عكا، صفد، لسان، ناصرة، حيفا، يافا، اللد، الرملة، تل أبيب، تل الربيع، وقطاع غزة، الضفة الغربية، الخليل، القدس، بيت لحم، جنين ونابلس وكل القرى.
في فرق ما بين المنهاج الدراسي اللي مقرر للتدريس، وفي فرق ما بين مفاهيمنا كمعلمين لاجئين. المنهاج الدراسي مقيد، يتحدث عن بعض المفاهيم البسيطة جدا جدا. احنا بنحاول نغلي هذا الموضوع من حيث انه نقدر نخرج عن اطار المنهاج، وبالتالي نصل لمفهوم الحقيقي لمفهوم حق العودة وتثبيته بهذا النقطة. اكيد في فرق بين مين هو المعلم اللي بيعلمه، قناعته. يعني اذا هو بده يتعلم من يعني اشخاص بيميلوا لاطار ديني معين، فبالتالي بيعتبر اسرائيل هي دولة لازم تزول.
تعلمت البنات عن حق العودة؟
مادة التاريخ من أول ما استلموا فلسطين لحد ما قاعدين المفاوضات بين العالم.
طبعا ليش بحكوا لكم ليش عن حق العودة؟
عن المقاومة اللي صارت والانتفاضات، الانتفاضة الأولى والثانية. عن لما بريطانيا سلمت أراضينا لليهود.
This is in Jerusalem, Colombia in Jerusalem.
طيب في المدرسة بتاخذي شيء عن حق العودة؟
أكيد موجود في المنهج الفلسطيني، في الكتب الوطنية، في كتب التاريخ.
وشو بحكوا لك عن حق العودة في المدارس؟
عن الاحتلال وعن كيف حصل في مكة ومين كان صانعها، كيف كان
شو بيعلموك؟
يعلمونا إنها يافا أرضنا لازم ممنوع نتخلى عنها، لأنها هي
أصلها إلنا لأجدادنا وآبائنا.
تاخذ المدارس عن العودة؟ زي ايش؟ شو بحكيوكم؟
يعني نرجع على بلادنا.
شو بتعطي الطلاب عن اللاجئين حق العودة؟
في المناهج معنى المخيم هو مكان أقيم للاجئين الفلسطينيين الذين أجبروا على ترك قراهم ومدنهم بسبب الاحتلال. وبيعطيهم معنى لاجئ، شو معنى لاجئ؟ اللاجئ أصله من إيه؟ من وين بيجي؟ أصله من 48 أراضي الاحتلال سنة 1948. طيب ليه جيتوا هون؟ بيسألهم بيقولوا إحنا جينا هون لأن اليهود أجبرونا، أخذوا أراضينا وأخذوا خياراتنا وأخذوا دورنا وأجبرونا على الرحيل وعملوا مجازر.
المنهاج فيه؟
في بس في معنى المخيم وتاريخ النكبة.
طيب الأولاد بيحلموا ولا بيرجعوا؟
كلهم بيحلموا، تسأل ولد بيقول لك أنا أصلي من يافا، أنا أصلي من سلمة، أنا أصلي من مناطق، يعني كل واحد حافظ مكان بلده.
طيب في منهم بيحكوا مثلا عن النقاب شيء؟
كلهم لما تصير الشغلات بيطلعوا كلهم. وبعدين يوم النكبة بيطلعوا رايات السور، بيطلعوا مظاهرات وبيعلقوا بوسترات في الشوارع وفي المدارس بيحيوها في كلمات عن النكبة.
أهم شيء عندنا بحياتنا إن إحنا نحلم حلم ونعمل جاهدين إن نرجع لبلادنا، لأنه الحياة في داخل هذا المخيم لا تعني إلا ولا شيء. هي نعتبرها مرحلة بحياتنا رايحة تنتهي آجلا أم عاجلا، وإحنا من
الشوفات in Jerusalem.
بأي وسيلة من الوسائل نثبت حقنا أن البلاد اللي هي تهجرنا منها وتدمرت هي بلادنا، وليس تمت بأي صلة لليهود من قريب أو من بعيد.
The armed struggle is an integral part of the right of return curriculum. In prose and poetry, the image of the martyr fighting for the right of return is a recurring theme. This is a poem taught in the 5th grade. We shall return. We shall return to the homes, to the valleys, to the mountains, under the flags of glory, jihad, and struggle, with blood, sacrifice, fraternity, and loyalty. UNRWA denies that it teaches the right of return, along with Palestinian officials, such as Education Minister Lamis Al-Alami. Al-Alami taught in UNRWA schools for over 20 years.
Is that included in the curriculum also, the right of return? Because
no, I don't think so. It's not put in that manner, no.
Who has been working in UNRWA schools? People like Awak Al-Keek, the ex-headmaster of an UNRWA school in Gaza. He led the Islamic Jihad engineering unit that built bombs and Qassam rockets. After his death, UNRWA students praised his memory at their school. And then there is the head of the UNRWA Gaza Teachers Union, Suhail Al-Hindi. Al-Hindi brought former Hamas leader Sheikh Ahmed.
Now, Al-Hindi, if there's any name you should remember from this briefing, it's Al-Hindi. Al-Hindi, the head of Hamas, head of the Hamas Workers Association in Gaza. And when we presented this to the United States Congress at the House Middle East Subcommittee, the representative owner said, oh, we fired him. So I made a call and found that he was removed from position for 2 days. He's been in position ever since. Very important. The denial supported by the State Department is the lie that continues.
Yassin, who also served as an UNRWA teacher, to an UNRWA school to lecture about suicide bombing and martyrdom. The road to Palestine runs through the blood of our martyrs. In public, UNRWA distributes glossy folders and informational packets, extolling the virtues of their work with refugees. But there's no mention of the 41 former UNRWA students who became suicide bombers and killed 83 people and wounded 436. When we visited schools that operate under UNRWA, students shared their plans on how to make the right of return happen.
أنسى بلادي، أنني أتذكر فلسطين وعاصمة القدس وبلادي وبلدي المجد، وأنني وسوف أحررها إن شاء الله بعد ذلك. هؤلاء أعداء، نعم إنهم ابن عمنا، كانوا في آدم هم ابن عمنا، اليهود ابن عمنا، بس هم اعتدوا على الله وصاروا أعداء لله وصاروا يحاربوا الله. فإحنا لازم إحنا نقتلهم، ما نخليش ولا واحد يعتدي الله عليه.
شو بتعرف عن حق العودة؟
هذا نرمى على اليهود احترام ونذبح اليهود.
طيب شو بدك تعملي لك حق العودة؟
إن نقتل اليهود وندافع عن وطننا.
For the last several years, Dr. Arnon Gross, a Jerusalem researcher, has conducted an intensive examination of Palestinian textbooks used by UNRWA. Gross believes that the Palestinian Authority, working with UNRWA, has created a curriculum for war.
The parameters of Palestinian textbooks, I mean the line or the goal or the mission of Palestinian education is that there is denial of legitimacy, demonized description of the other, and no peace with the other is advocated. Now, non-recognition, demonization, no peace advocacy, emphasis on armed struggle for liberation with no geographical limit, all that make a curriculum of suspended war. It is not a curriculum for peace.
Okay, where do we go from here? First of all, there have been some suggestions that the United States should cut off UNRWA. If tomorrow morning the United States cut off UNRWA, then Qatar or another Arab country would take its place. Therefore, I gave out some pages here. We've conceptualized the idea of the UNRWA Reform Initiative, which is conducted by 2 Arab journalists, 2 Israeli journalists, an American filmmaker. And our plans are, 1, to produce a new film on the incitement in the UNRWA schools. And by the way, Hamas in Gaza receives 40% of its budget from the Palestinian Authority. That's not generally understood. It's not that it's a separate entity. In fact, it was 1995. We've been around for a while. We produced the first film to show that the arms from Hamas were coming from the Palestinian Authority. So it's not a separate entity. Our next project is to produce a short film on the incitement of the UNRWA schools to show to the legislators who can make a decision about whether they get the money, or whether to condition the funds. We're going to the US Congress, the British Parliament, the Canadian Parliament, the Norwegian Parliament, the Swedish Parliament, and the Australian Parliament. We're going to be filming the schools in Jerusalem. 20% of the Arabs in Jerusalem learn in UNRWA schools. 2, we're going to present the footage that shows the military training happening in these UN schools. 3, we're going to distribute the translations of the texts. We have a summary here. 4, we're going to show, we're working on a new program, a new report on the continued Hamas domination of the schools at the time that one was denying it, but we have the evidence. 5, we just issued a report which leads our website on how the humanitarian aid is stolen. Humanitarian aid to the Palestinian Authority is stolen for personal reasons, personal use by the leadership of the Palestinian Authority. And by the way, all kinds of nefarious enterprises, gun running, narcotics running, and prostitution running as a result of the cash glut in Gaza. Number 6, we're going to make sure that this comes out in a systematic way, filming the military training, filming the schools, we bring over an American producer to Israel, and bringing all of our experts to Jewish organizations ready to listen. We got a call from AIPAC forbidding us from going to AIPAC with this material. If any of you are members of AIPAC or have anything to say about AIPAC, and I'm saying this on the record and on camera, you can raise questions. AIPAC doesn't give us answers. We know that AIPAC works very closely with the Israel Civil Administration, whose officers are very involved with business. There is no humanitarian aid given to Gaza. No humanitarian aid. There are products sold to Gaza in the thousands, maybe in the millions. There's altogether 30 billion shekels of Israeli products sold in the Palestinian Authority. And the people who act as the go-betweens are former military officers who suddenly are for peace. One of them, Grisha Yakubovich, wrote an article in the Bedein Journal in London very recently saying that Hamas has changed its approach. It no longer favors throwing the Jews in the sea. No longer favors overthrowing the state of Israel. Therefore, Mr. Rabbi Yakubovich now is involved in cement supplies to UNRWA and Hamas. He says it's not Hamas, it's going to private elements. So these are the people who dominate the AIPAC program, talking about economic peace, which is basically blood money for the other side. When you supply when you supply economic aid to a former enemy, if it's a former enemy, and they've already surrendered, and you have a Marshall Plan, that's one thing. When you supply aid and it's being used for nefarious purposes, such as an education system whose purpose is to overthrow Israel, that's nothing less than treason against the state of Israel. I'm saying strong words, but you know what? When you live in Israel, you speak your mind based on fact, based on what you see. And as a father of 6 children and 5 grandchildren with 2 on the way, we have a responsibility to protect our children from such nefarious purposes. An agency has grown up whose purpose is to wipe out the state of Israel and the people of Israel. And as my colleague Benny Bedein would say, they don't favor the two-state solution, they favor the two-stage solution. Very important, the two-stage solution. So that's our message. We come here looking to wake people up, to look for support. Again, we have the summaries, people who would give us a contribution. We have the summaries of the school books. This is my book, Roadblock to Peace. I no longer have any copies of it, but I will be happy to send you a PDF. Make sure you sign the list. Our business plan is over here. There are cards here for contributions. And before we get to questions, there was a journalist here, Ben Yamini, who's been covering this issue for his entire career. Maybe you wanted to mention, you'd like to say a couple words of your perspective.
First of all, thank you,
Can he be
David.
heard from there? Or should he come up here?
For sure, yeah.
Benjor, come here and I'll give you a microphone.
Yeah. Yes.
Just a few words. Thank you, David, for all the work that you're doing. Just to give you maybe a kind of a wider perspective about what does it mean, the whole story of UNRWA, refugees, Nakba. We have to bear in mind that actually when we are speaking about the first half of the previous century, 52 million people became refugees because the whole international community decided to accept the idea of self-determination. So people were forced out of their homelands. It did not happen only in the Middle East. It happened in Europe, it happened in Asia, it happened in many other places. 52 million people became refugees. And they did not receive any special agency of the UN in order to take care for the refugees. Just bear in mind that if for the 12 million refugees from Germany, if there was a special agency that was established only for them, the agency would perpetuate the problem. The agency will educate the refugees that actually the Germans were right when they attacked Europe and exterminated Jews. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Because what UNRWA is doing is just to educate the people that they were right, that they were attacked by Jews. Just to remember that it was the Arabs. There were no Palestinians, by the way, in that time. My parents were Palestinians because they grew up in Israel. There were no Palestinians in that time, but the Arabs did not accept the partition resolution in 1947. They attacked Israel, and now they are complaining that they are suffering. One, and something which is highly important. It's not only that the Palestinians were singled out, received their own agency, it's also that actually we forget that Jews were forced out from Arab countries, just like in any other part of the world. Poland, Ukraine, 1.4 million people were forced out from one side to the other side after the Second World War. Did you hear about any special agency? Did you hear about the problem? Did you hear about so many professors in Columbia and NYU, in Berkeley and Princeton, speaking about the Nakba of the Ukrainians or of the Polish people?
Greeks and Turks. Greece and
Yeah,
Turkey.
this is the first example in the First World War. The biggest example of population exchange that took place, and when we say population exchange, I mean, it sounds nice. It's much worse than that. I mean, many massacres took place in every event of population exchange. But we forget it all, and so many professors here in universities tell their students that Israel committed one of the worst crimes, I'm quoting now, in modern history, which is a lie, which is a lie. And they are lying again and again. And when your daughters and sons coming to university, that's what they hear. They are brainwashed. They don't have the information, the knowledge, in order to refute what their professors are telling them. And the outcome is that they are becoming, slowly by slowly, because of Tikkun Olam, they are becoming anti-Israelis. Not because they are anti-Semites, because they have no idea about basic facts. And here we need this kind of institution that David Bedein is running, just in order to open eyes of many people. Because so many people don't know what is going on. Why do we have UNRWA in many universities, and I guess you know it, the JSP and JDP, those anti-Israeli organizations, what they do is they distribute eviction orders in dormitories in order to show the students who don't understand anything about the problem what happened to them in 1948. Again, what they do is they single out the problem of the Palestinians or the Arabs who attacked Israel, who declare publicly again and again and again, we are coming to exterminate the not even born Jewish entity. All forgotten, and they became the victims. My grandmother was a victim because she escaped Yemen 100 years ago, by the way, not in 1948, because of the orphaned order. The orphaned order, meaning that every Jewish who does not have one parent was supposed to be converted by force to Islam. So she had to escape. She had to escape. She never defined herself as a refugee. She never defined herself as a refugee, but she was a refugee. Actually. I mean, she had to escape, and she escaped to what? To Eretz Israel. She didn't even hear about Palestine. There was not any Palestine, by the way. Palestine, it was a definition that was given by Romans. It was used by the Christians, never by Muslims, never by Jews. But people don't know basic information. I will give you a lecture now of 2 hours, which I'm not going to do. But basic information is not known, even not to pro-Israelis many times. And of course, when your sons and daughters, when they come to university, and they are exposed to this anti-Israeli propaganda, they are becoming anti-Israelis. Because they don't know. It has nothing to do with criticism, with left wing or right wing, nothing to do with it. I'm speaking only about basic information. And we have a problem. And yes, we have the problem of ignorance. People don't know. And we have to thank the people for his work.
Thank you very much.
Because that's how.
We use the expression, let my people know.
Let my people know.
And just to repeat, wouldn't it be nice if the 15,000 people at AIPAC would know about this? It's just no coincidence, Mr. Daniel Levy, the funder and founder of J Street, that you're also the funder and founder of Americans for the American Friends of UNRWA, Mr. Daniel Levy. Nice to know who we're up against. Understand the forces that are spreading the lie and the forces that are preventing the lie from coming out. UNRWA does buy $250,000 of Israeli products, and the people who earn money from those products, not that I'm going to mention the Israel Kibbutz Industries Association or the Nesher Concrete conglomerate, not that I'm going to mention by name, but I am. So you understand we have a fight on our hands. We shall overcome. And these are the parshas that we learn about the Jews in slavery, but it's a mental slavery also. And those who reject or don't want to hear, those who can bring you the truth of what's going on in order to redeem it. Any questions you have, please? Please.
Why do you think that the professors of all these Ivy League schools aren't doing their research and are teaching all these lies?
The question we asked was, what about the professors? Why aren't they doing their research? We're dealing with a situation of the marketing of the lie for professors in a systematic way. We were the agency 16 years ago that revealed the extent to which the Saudi Arabian government was underwriting the contracts of the Middle East study departments in the United States. Now we understand the results. One of my students showed me a paper that his roommate wrote, a very nice 30-page paper, very clear, with all the footnotes. Every sentence was a lie. Because the material that's being brought to them from professors who seemingly have academic backgrounds basically have nothing to do with the truth. And ever since the beginning of the Oslo process in 1993, the people who were running the establishment, both in the Jewish establishment here and in Israel, did not feel it necessary to balance the issue. They used the word economic peace. Well, we'll do business with the other side and everything will be fine. Well, you cannot buy an ideology. That should be very clear. Any other questions? Please. Yeah, just tell me who you are, brother.
Jeffrey Bernard. I want to make a few comments, and you can respond to whatever.
No problem. I will repeat what you say for the camera.
Okay. Those countries that contribute to UNRWA, including the United States, this is well known by the Congress.
No, it's not. Next question.
Okay. Well,
the first question was, is this well known by the Congress? The answer is no. Understand, there are right now, I can name, in another discussion, 28 organizations, none of which are seemingly anti-Israel, who supply information that contradicts everything you heard today. However, when they do so, they say we're pro-Israel and this doesn't happen, it's not really happening, etc. So Congress, we are an agency that goes there, we raise money to send our experts, and not easy to do that. But the other side does not hesitate to do so. And there's not one Jewish organization, not one, pushing these issues. Not one. Okay? Next question.
Well, some of them do. Some of them do. And they're very aware of...
I'm sorry, I can tell you from being on Capitol Hill, there's not knowledge of what's going on. Next question.
All right, because I was gonna ask, the next thing was gonna say, well, who's speaking up? But we might as well forget about that comment.
It doesn't, we haven't found them. I'm hoping to find people who will use this material systematically. Monte Kedar.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
We have to run to Long Island.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
That's it.
You're great.
Those countries that contribute to UNRWA, especially now with the new administration, can we?
Okay, the question, what about the question here about the new administration for the nations that have donated to UNRWA? Understand, if you look on the UNRWA website, you will hear about a peace curriculum and children learning sports. They forget to mention that the sports teams and tournaments are in memory of those who have committed first-degree murder. Now, they're being overwhelmed with what seems to be reasonable people. Now, the new administration, we have met with the staff of the new president. We briefed them, but the other side is also briefing. And if 20, 30 people, I want to tell a quick story. A friend of mine is a retired official in the U.S. Congress. At my age 66, some people retire. I don't know how they do that. But he said to me, I said, what's your secret? He said, if we get 10 letters, 10 reasonable letters on any subject, we go into a tizzy. You understand? Your personal response, people who see this film, people who hear this lecture today, your personal response to staffers of the United States Congress make a difference. It doesn't have to be a lot. But if you show that it's fun, and don't sign petitions. Throw the petitions out. Personal notes from my colleague, UNRWA, the chairperson of the Middle East Subcommittee. She pleads with you to write to her. She pleads with you to give feedback. Because the other side is not sitting on its hands. Understand? Next question.
A follow-up to that. When you mention the other side, especially with this current administration, I wouldn't think they would have much sway.
The other side knows, he asked about the other side. The other side knows how to market itself. Remember, who was the first president to recognize the PLO? Ronald Reagan, December '88. Conservative Republicans who were in business in the Arab world, who got together a coalition to get President Reagan to recognize the PLO. December '88. This is not a lefty thing. I asked, a year later, I took around Alan Keyes, a very fine man who advised Reagan. I said, I took him around to Israel. I said, my payback is, why did he do it? He said, no, Saudi pressure. The Saudis gave a dictate, and he listened. Today the Saudis are a little bit less strong and whatever, less enthusiastic about UNRWA, etc. But understand, this is not confined. The pro-Arab lobby is not confined to crazy lefties. All kinds of people are involved with it. And the Jewish organizations are not necessarily lefties. They just want to let things go and be fine. And I do want to mention that it would be nice if we had full disclosure from Jewish members of Jewish organizations who are invested in the Arab world and who are invested in the Palestinian Authority. I want to just say a moment, one of the left liberal organizations that helped us out, at least emotionally, Rabbi David Klayman, who was the head of the American Jewish Congress in Israel. And when he was dying of cancer 12 years ago, he came to me to tell me that he had thrown 3 board members off of his board because they had received investment portfolios from Arafat. And Arafat did this across the board. I'd like to have a disclosure day for all board members of all major Jewish organizations who are invested in the PA. Last year at the AIPAC conference, we saw investors come over to try to raise investments in the PA at the AIPAC conference. I want to know who is being compromised over here. Next question. That's here. No, it's enough. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
When you've had success in convincing people who may have had a different point of view, what arguments have you found to be most effective?
The most important is this. The question was, what are the best arguments to use? There's one argument to use of almost anything else, besides what my colleague Ben Joriamini was talking about, the fact that why should there be a discriminatory situation about refugee hood? Education. The United Nations is based on what? Peace begins here. My mom brought me to meet Eleanor Roosevelt when I was 10 years old. I never forgot that. That is what the United Nations is all about. Not a setting up an agency, education for war. Now, when you write that, how can you, and you can write this to the most, we met recently, I was in Sweden. I met with some of the people who are not friendly to Israel in the Swedish parliament. I said, if your intention is to help Arabs and to educate them for what you call a Palestinian state in the West Bank and all that, why are you educating them the opposite? So this is not a pro-Israel issue. This is an issue of absolute accountability and transparency also for people who aren't Israel's friends. So because you're not, when we have situations where we can prove that the medical supplies given to UNRWA disappear. So if your purpose is to help the Arabs with medical supplies and it disappears, and by the way, the unprecedented situation, what happened yesterday, when the President of the United States threw away the latest allocation to the Palestinian Authority, because we brought them from our researchers. We were a small agency, but our two researchers brought them on a silver platter the proof that funds from USAID to the Palestinian Authority were going right into the pockets of Abbas and his family. We got that to the President, and the President cut it off. This is called transparency. That's what America, that's what democracy is supposed to be all about. Not to be rubber stamps. And when you, after you hear this discussion, not a lot of time before Shabbat to send letters. But Motzei Shabbat happens after Shabbat. Let people know. And they do a very unusual thing. You call to make sure they got it. We've been sending a daily memo, now it's going to be a weekly memo, to all the staffers of the Middle East Subcommittee of the Congress. But it's something easy to do. And they're very pleased to receive the information. So long as you don't grade them a cup and drive them nuts and talk about cut off UNRWA. Well, you can't cut off UNRWA. Because UNRWA is, I had an interview in 1988 when we began this project with Abba Ibn, who showed me the lecture he gave in 1958, 10 years to Israel's birth. That UNRWA is a dagger in the heart of Israel you can't take out because it's put in there by the United Nations General Assembly. If you can't get it out, you can do what we learn how to do in social work and dysfunctional community organizations. You reform it. You give them conditions for receiving the money that they can't possibly live by. And that's how you get it. Somebody who hasn't asked a question. Sam Bond. One of my mentors. Go ahead.
When you went to Congress,
Yes.
what specific congressman supported you, have been able to take this up?
37-0. Here is a great story. When we went to the Middle East Subcommittee of the Congress, actually the Foreign Relations Committee, in last March it was. The State Department presented their position. We presented our position. They voted 37-0 for our position, right? That there are problems in the school books and the education is for war. Whereas the State Department, not only did they say they were for war, they actually invented issues as if there's Holocaust education. Let me tell you to what degree UNRWA will act to promote their product. We appeared at a Chicago synagogue a few years ago, showed our films. And UNRWA sent a representative to that same synagogue asking, are there any survivors of concentration camps at your shul? So they found a social worker, they hired a social worker to give an evening for concentration camp survivors, for UNRWA to raise funds from them for Holocaust curriculum in the UNRWA schools, which does not exist. And they made the same presentation at J Street. Now, you understand, using concentration camp victims with numbers on their arms to raise money for UNRWA. Now, I was able to find out that they didn't by going to, there is one guy at the UN, Sadiq Baston, who I were able to get to, a man from Ghana, and he does some supervisory work at UNRWA, and he had the integrity to write me back that it doesn't exist. But that's after the damage was done. But understand the extent to which they'll go to raise money for their cause. The lies which they use. I compare it to the cigarette industry. That's another discussion. Yes, Joe.
Yeah. The great philanthropist and a member of Israel, George Soros, have any connections
all business or?
No, George Soros, the question asked was, does George Soros have any connection? We haven't discerned any connection at this moment, and we look for it.
He was sub rosa with J Street for many, many years.
No,
They wouldn't
George Soros gave seed money to J Street, a lot of seed money, and then that was it.
They wouldn't admit it.
He admitted it. Next question, please. Tell me who you are.
Sandra Kessler. I'm retired fundraiser. My last position was at Teachers College, Columbia University, and my biggest concern right now is how do we get to the young people? How do we get to the college students, both Jewish and non-Jewish? The Jews to understand what's going on and not to be afraid to advocate, and the non-Jewish students to get them to realize they're being duped.
The question was asked about how do we get to the young people? We get to the young people using young ways of doing things.
Right.
When we showed the first film we showed here about child abuse, that was prepared by our 18-year-old students. 3-minute program. So when I got off the plane yesterday and went to a kosher delicatessen, there were 6 girls from colleges around New York. They became my students for a few minutes, victims. Show the films. And they said, oh, we've never seen such a thing. So, if we were to rent a hall at Columbia, at Barnard, anywhere, and we can bring over, we have to fund it to do it, but we have at least 2, maybe 3 Palestinian journalists who are willing to come over here and testify that this is what's happening. And they'll speak to the young people. These are journalists in their 40s. We have Palestinian journalists in their 20s ready to talk. We have to facilitate them to talk. No one else is going to do that. We're ready to do that. We have people who can, we have Palestinian journalists ready to come over and speak. We have young people ready to work with them. But they understand. What the Oslo process did was to disenfranchise these people, right? And create a totalitarian system of no freedom of speech, but now they're breaking through now that the Palestinian Authority is a little weaker than it was before. But the young people are ready to listen. We can bring them over, but we have to circumvent the entire system of Hillel and everyone else and go directly. And young people will listen.
But it's also, people are terribly afraid, and these are the people who should be talking about it and showing us that they're terribly afraid about the backlash from, or the lash of the whole JVP.
Everyone's
SJP,
afraid, but no one's, I can just say,
it takes guts.
Look, first of all, the people who are giving a lot of money to International Hillel, etc., are hesitant. Forget about it. The one thing we can do is just bring them directly. We have all kinds of people we can bring from Israel and here. And you know what? There's a very high percentage of Arab students who are not in the world of the Wahhabi. My friend Dr. Kedar, who just passed away, who just left the room. I'm sorry, he's not here to respond. Dr. Mordechai Kedar, who was just here for a few minutes, Dr. Kedar has mapped out an amazing map of families in Israel, Arab Hamulot, extended families, the ones who accept Israel's right to be here, to be on the earth. And they're ready to speak up. You just have to facilitate it.
Aren't they afraid?
No,
Why
not
not?
afraid at all. They love, and one thing about the Arabs, they love fighting each other, even more than we do. Maxine.
One of the things that Dr. Kedar has proposed is a multi-state, an 8-state solution. It's one of the things we should talk about.
No.
But when David brings the Arab journalists or the Arab intellectuals to speak before Congress, there is a power and a weight, and I've watched it happen. There's a power and a weight that we as Jews, or even Christians, cannot create. There is a gentleman named Basim Eid who has spoken on behalf of the center. He has the ability to make people understand. People who otherwise would say, oh, well, Judeo-Christian, blah, blah, blah. But this is a man who lives and lives the talk and walks the walk. And that kind of person needs to be supported. And there are generations, as David says, who follow him. And in those generations, there is a kernel of hope. There's a guy in Washington who was born in Beersheba. He's a Palestinian born in Beersheba. He's a lawyer. He works with Egyptians on gas lines. He's the kind of guy who will, and he was my host during the inauguration, and he is the kind of guy who will be a voice and a spokesman and wants to see his family and all the other Palestinians have a normal life. That's all, that's the focus that has to be developed.
We just, in terms of social media, there's been, first of all, what was just said here is that there's some people, Palestinian Arabs, ready to speak out. It's a matter of facilitating them to get over here and also speak there. We have 78, we now have 78 institutions of higher learning in Israel. Unfortunately, the other side, as well as also amongst Israeli Arabs, through finances they received from the New Israel Fund. The New Israel Fund, we revealed documents in 2000 how they wanted to Palestinianize the Israeli Arab culture so that they would not speak about anything pro-Israel and only pro-Palestinian state. So the funding going to Adalah from naive Jewish organizations over here. Adalah, which is an organization that supports the replacement of Israel with Palestine. How do we find that? Because we interviewed them. They were very proud to talk about it. And that's what we have to deal with. There's enough people ready to work. I do not see a well of support for it, but I'm not going to give up. I'm convinced that if we keep marketing this, we'll get the truth out. Please, young lady.
I think that...
What is your name?
Oh, Michelle Weiss.
Michelle?
I think there's just a passion that's missing with the Jewish young people, that you see how well organized the Arab culture, that they brought that young, good-looking guy. Not only was he good-looking, he could sing, that when he could sing and then make poems and get the girls swimming and get, you know, they're very smart the way that they organize it, and we're missing this leadership in old people and young people. But if they could get them passionate again, it seems like Americans became separated between being Americans, being pro-Israel, and somehow they managed to do this good job.
Michelle is pointing out that there's been an effort, a passionate effort on the Arab side to get their voice across. There's another issue. It's a matter of putting the toothpaste back in the tube. When we started our agency, which was October 1st, 1986, we brought our material to the new Foreign Minister, Mr. Peres, and the new Prime Minister, Mr. Shamir. Shamir was pleased and happy. Peres said, we don't need this. Since 1986, until recently, there's been a hesitancy in the state of Israel to promote the truth of what's going on. Voices like that of Ben-Dror Yamini are very few in the Israeli media, and also amongst Israeli young people, because it's not been encouraged. The panacea has been, we'll do business with the other side, we'll show that we make microchips, and that's it. We haven't been, and we have to re-energize. I can just tell you, as a student at the University of Wisconsin 48 years ago, I thought it was yesterday, but I guess I'm not the gingy that I was, but at the time, we had a program inside a group called SDS, Students for Democratic Society. We had a group, and we called it the Radical Zionist Alliance. No, it wasn't Kahana, it was something else. We were on the left. And the idea was to infiltrate the left with truth. And say we would it be a Zionist in a revolution, and a revolutionary in Zion. And we had passion behind us. We had the Israeli establishment behind us. Mordechai Baron, he's now 85. And he funded it. We didn't know he was funding us, but we did. He helped us do amazing things to just bring the truth to people who were beginning the myth that in 1967 we planned to conquer Judea Samaria, and we did it with a certain ferocity. And we broke it apart. And what was our theme then? We were 19 years old. Israel is real. That was our theme. And we broke through. But since 1986 and since the Oslo process began, this wadi-dadi idea that, well, we'll do business, we'll do kumbaya, and we'll bring Palestinian teachers, and now all the Jewish organizations that send students to Israel have these pro-PLO people speak to them. Mr. Natan Sharansky will not speak to me because I objected to that. He said to my colleague, Professor Cutler, he doesn't want to speak to me ever again. I said, why are you bringing people from a group called Breaking the Silence to meet with Jewish groups that come over to Israel? That's an organization that spreads the rumor that Jews poison wells. It's an organization that also spread the rumor, working with a group of rabbis for human rights, that Israel starved people in Gaza. You realize that Rabbis for Human Rights organized 200 clerics around the United States to have one morning a week of fasting for Arabs who were starving in Gaza. And when I asked them the question, it was proven to be wrong. Why don't you just say you were wrong? Well, we can't do that. So they fired Rabbi Asherman. So Rabbi Asherman started another group. They fired Rabbi Asherman just in case he comes on this road. Understand what's going on. The elements of fraud working in the Jewish community are well organized. Forget about the Arabs. The Jew, what is going on here? The fact that it's so difficult to have Jewish organizations present these issues. I'm not talking about passion, I'm talking about the facts. And when how many Jewish groups heard a 3-minute or 4-minute discussion from what Ben-Dror Yamini said here a few minutes ago about what Jews went through. And by the way, the passion of our work is going in a new direction. We're going to be starting a Center for the Study of Antisemitism in the Arab World, so people know what that's all about. Another question, please.
I have a comment
Go
to
ahead.
make as to what Ms. Weiss said.
What is your name?
Leo.
Leo, go ahead.
What Ms. Weiss said before. Part of the problem seems to me that the Arab world, particularly the people you were showing on your film, have critical mass. There's a lot of them. They're not educated. It's a case of follow the leader. There's only one kind of education, and it certainly isn't trying to kill cancer. It's to kill Jews. That's one problem. On the other side of the equation, the Jewish world is very diverse, very not centralized, very fractured, ultra-Orthodox, Orthodox, conservative, Reformed. They don't really speak to each other, one to the other. There's no unity. I think, to me, those are two very critical problems that we face.
What Leo is pointing out is the fact that there's lack of a critical mass amongst the Jews, where there does exist amongst Arabs who tend to be not so educated. We're dealing with the leadership of UNRWA and the Fatah, the vast majority of whom have advanced degrees in higher education, doctorates also. They're very smart, very well informed, very intelligent. I spoke 10 days ago for a combined group of Presbyterian Christians, Protestants, and Reformed Jews. I started off my discussion, where is your sensitivity to refugees? Are any of you sensitive to the crisis faced by refugees? Oh, I touched the button. And then what about refugees who are being abused by the American government? Oh, I touched another button. What about refugees who've been left there for 67 years? I touched another button. No, they did, because I forced them to, because they had hired me to speak to them for an hour. And now they've invited me to come to speak with them in Buffalo, and they're activating their liberal Democratic congressman from Buffalo, who's a member of the Middle East subcommittee of the Congress. It took me 1 hour, 1 second, to get across the issue that this is a humanitarian issue, this is an issue of abuse of human rights and of Arab human rights, and they didn't know anything about it. A whole generation of non-discussion of these issues, as if it doesn't exist. Ben-Dror, Bakasha.
No, just one thing that maybe many of you know.
I'll repeat what you said, no.
Just something that many of you know. In many Hillel chapters, you cannot even be pro-Israeli in many Hillel chapters. And it's a problem because I'm giving a lot of lectures around here in the United States and universities. And it's a problem. I'm not a right-winger, I'm not a left-winger, I'm just presenting the facts. A book of mine is going to be published in some months in English, and it's only about the lies that are so much disseminated here in American universities. And it's a problem, because many people say about the Trump age that it is a post-truth age. It's not. Because actually the post-factual age was created by universities, by professors. They are lying so much to their students, and when eventually someone is becoming the head of a chapter in Hillel, many times he is afraid not to bring someone like from Shomrim Shtika breaking the silence. So they are invited much more than anyone who is going to refute what they are saying. So we have a problem not with the anti-Israelis. We do have a problem with the groups, the communities, the chapters, the NGOs that are supposed to be pro-Israelis. There is a problem, and we have to admit it, a real problem. Nothing to do with political view. Nothing to do with it. I don't mind about political views as long as they are based. It's not to be a right-winger or a left-winger. It's just to know basic facts. But the problem is that lies prevail, and they prevail here. With a free society, with the freedom of speech, we have a problem. We do have a problem. It's not simple. 5 years ago, it was easy for me to give a speech in any university. Right now, it's a problem. Not because I'm a right-winger, because I'm not, he knows my views. Not because of that. Because people don't want to hear basic facts that refute what I call the industry of lies.
One of the, what I'm just repeating for the camera, what Ben Drori Amini, a journalist from Israel, is saying is that the Hillels often don't allow a pro-Israel speaker or an Israel analyst to speak there. And he's mentioning that it's become more and more difficult over the past 5 years to get that point across. And he's not coming as a right-winger, right-winger, just anyone coming to tell the basic facts. I would ask if anyone wants to sponsor an investigation to find out who on the boards of Hillel are invested in the Palestinian Authority. You think I'm nuts? That's what's going on. And also in corporations that are exporting to the Palestinian Authority, they are having tremendous, tremendous influence. Don't think it's only because of naivete or anti-Israel, but there's a business element going on here. I was here present in 1994 when a number of Jewish businessmen, not left-wing, whatever, they were all approached by the PA for handsome investments. And this is now coming home to roost. Understand, no one wants to upset that apple cart. Well, I do, because I like it, because I don't think it's proper. But again, this is my son, who runs the Sderot Media Center for the last 10 years. He has trouble presenting the issue of Sderot to campuses. And they're taken over to Israel by Arabs and by investors in the PA. I'll mention by name Eval Giladi, who is the head of the Portland Trust, who recruits financial investments in the PA using his position at APEC when he comes there, and said this is the panacea. Invest in these guys. But when you invest, you have what we call a conflict of interest. And conflicts of interest is not what people understand very, very well.
What about Chabad?
There are some Chabad houses very involved and some not involved. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe was very clear in his position, which is that if you so much as even hint that you're recognizing national rights of the other side, you're causing a big problem for Israel. But Chabad, amongst when Hillels don't allow people to speak, Chabad does.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
That's very clear. So this lady here, what is your name?
Pat Klein.
Pat.
Actually, two things. First is, what do you think about ways of making Israel cool? For instance, there was talk about the one of the Kardashians, who are not Jewish, they're racially intermarried, having a reality show in Israel. You know, making it like when Bill Maher, who happens to be so far to the left, but he is pro-Israel, this is where the young people, I mean, my son quotes Bill Maher, and he's on our side. You know, he just says, oh, this, that, you know. This is where the influence lies, is making it hip and cool.
The question was about reality shows. Having reality shows come to Israel is nothing better than to do that. And the people I'm close to know how to do that and would be happy to do it, and it's a great thing to do.
Yeah.
And that will attract, I work with young people
right.
who are my interns and by the way, commercial. Our agency is now establishing a new volunteer operation here in the United States, based at the UN. Why based at the UN? Because I'm convinced that the countries that give money to UNRWA, this UNRWA school system that you've heard about today, the vast majority think that it's a peace education of some kind. And if you speak to them, you may get somewhere. I met with a major delegation, I won't say off the record which it was, a major delegation yesterday, and they're open to listening. But I want to get more and more young people to meet with them, and it'll be marvelous if we develop these anagrams, what are the anagrams, Instagrams, what are these, that the young people present. I can't remember, I forget what they're called.
And then
Yeah, they're my age.
do you think that with the new administration and Jared Kushner and all that, there would be any positive influence that things might turn around?
All I can say is what's happened in the past, today is January 27th, what's happened in 1 week in the new administration to reverse certain trends of 28 years of the unconditional embrace of the PLO, Bezrat Hashem, it will continue. With 28 years. It didn't start under Carter, it started under Reagan. Someone who hasn't spoken yet. We'll just take a break. Sam Bond, please.
I have an unusual thought. The difficulty of getting into the Jewish community may be something that's more difficult to pursue. Universities have an obligation to present sides of the issue. Now, I would be willing to work with somebody at Columbia, of which I'm a graduate, and I think to do something together, to talk to the dean, to see if we could get a program like yours into Mesa or the SEPA. That's where it belongs. It doesn't belong, Itamar Marcus came to Columbia, he was forced to speak in the mathematics building and marginalized. This program belongs in the classroom, and the university is obliged to present this side of the situation as well as the other side.
What Sam Bond is saying.
I would work with somebody at Columbia, if somebody is a graduate and is interested in working.
What Sam Bond is saying is Sam has been working on this issue as long as I have, more than 30 years. Sam is saying he'd be willing to work with people at Columbia University to help present this side. What I found, by the way, in my own background 35 years ago when I was promoting Aliyah, I was working for the Israel Association of Social Workers. We couldn't work with the Jewish organizations, so we went to the social work organizations to promote it. So I don't know that this material should only be produced to the Jewish world, which is a little bit hesitant, or the Jewish organizational world, but in straight ways, offer. And by the way, when we bring Bassam, or we have another fellow, Masad Abutuma, when we bring them, we ask, do you want to hear the Palestinian Arab point of view? People listen. They react very well. Please,
time for one or two more questions.
Two more questions. Go ahead. I have it here for you.
Oh, my name is Deborah Block, and I was wondering how ZOA has responded to you, if you've approached them at all, and also, what about Birthright Israel, if all of those kids going were exposed to something like this and aren't...
ZOA has responded very well. The question was how has ZOA responded, and Birthright. ZOA has utilized this material very effectively. My suggestion to ZOA, I've said it to them, is they should have someone who is Arabic speaking to work with them, because if you don't have someone Arabic speaking, people will say, oh, you made it up, because this is too amazing, too amazing. The second thing, Birthright, 90% of the Birthright groups will touch us with a 10-foot pole, and one of the reasons for Mr. Sharansky being upset with us is because we've objected to that. It's really a shame. Birthright is an opportunity to really get across the point that these students who come for 10 days to Israel, but generally we're not allowed to approach them, which is really tragic. And if you can just ask the people in Birthright to do so, we're not going to use a sledgehammer. We're going to use just basic techniques. And also, we try to say, don't you want to hear the Arab point of view? Why do you want to, that's how we get our point across. One more question, someone who hasn't asked that, perhaps? Someone who hasn't asked?
I just kind of, mine is more of a comment, but it speaks to the issue of fragmentation in the Jewish community, as well as reaching young people across the board, Jewish and non-Jewish, is that one component that hasn't been discussed yet is the psychological one, the emotional one, which has to do with who gets the empathy from the young people who, and the older people most of my world are Jewish secularists, and very much on the left. And there is this factor of who do they care about, and why do they care about the Palestinian Nakba and not the Jewish the Israeli war for independence, because of partly it has to do with the power struggle and who's on top and who's not. But in the communication field, in trying to speak to the high school and college age kids, the pro-Palestinians that get sent around, especially that are co-sponsored by groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, they're passionate, they're attractive, they're passionate. They have the force of conviction. And what I'm not seeing in that world is that kind of passion, conviction, and caring coming from the Jewish side. We want to get them with facts, and we all know that facts just don't change minds anymore. And people
I want to
new,
respond
so.
very clearly. I overheard someone here saying that they work with the Lone Soldiers Association, named for my fellow Philadelphian, Michael Levin. The question was asked about, what about building empathy, and how the other side does it and we don't. When we first began 30 years ago, the first thing I did was to place students on the other side, something called the Palestine Press Service, to understand how they were working, how they were doing. And the people they trained, Israel had, unfortunately, let a lot of people out of prison. Everyone was trained, and we went to their training sessions to say, I was beaten in jail because I was a human rights activist. And these are the scars. And we're only, and using the body language, that we're only for peace. I'll never forget a very important moment when a journalist from Tikkun magazine came to see me, and she just spent a couple days with two, what she called human rights activists who'd been in jail, and how they said they were tortured, and they were just human rights people. So she went for lunch. At that time we were using faxes. I asked the Justice Ministry to fax me their criminal record. Well, these fellows were in jail for raping and murdering Palestinian children who were pro-Israel. Raping and murdering. She then threw up her lunch, and I don't know if she didn't really change her article. But understand what the other side is capable of doing is lying and convincing, being very, very convincing. Now, our side doesn't do enough to show, we're not in the minority. We're just not doing it. If you were to ask the Israeli consulate here in New York or anywhere, there's a Palestinian Arab coming to my campus, can we have his criminal record? Within 10 minutes they can get it with the computer. So who that guy has murdered? Because what they do is they send Arabs around who have been in jail for life sentences. And if you were in jail for a life sentence, why were you in jail for a life sentence? Because you murdered. So here's his murder record. Here's the people he murdered. So I did this twice on a college campus. So you know whom he murdered when he comes to speak to you. He wasn't holding a sign saying, peace now. This person was in jail because he murdered. And he's running around America. Now, I met with the Justice Department, Counterintelligence Division. And they said to me, David, if you ever find someone like that coming to America with a murder record, we'll get them in trouble. Well, 5 American administrations didn't do anything. This administration may do something about that. All you gotta do, get the name of that Arab coming to speak who has a criminal record. If JVP is bringing him, or if all kinds of organizations are bringing him, and within minutes, you can get. And we have a fantastic justice minister in Israel, and she's responsive. You can ask for that criminal record. Because what would be better than to have the name? We did a story, I'm going to finish with this story, of how we succeeded women in our first year of work was someone Mahmoud Isa Muhammad. That name doesn't mean anything to anybody. But on December 26, 1968, when I was a freshman at the University of Wisconsin, he attacked an El Al plane on the ground in Greece. And he murdered an Israeli working for the United Nations who was on that plane. He was arrested and then let go. And he resurfaced in Canada. We were asked to do a campaign to expose him. We took an ad out. Who was on the plane? The pilot appeared, and the family of the man that he murdered appeared. And what did we do with this? We took the family of the man that he murdered, and this is a guy who was popular on Canadian campuses. We took the family, took the pictures, we did interviews, and this is the man he murdered. This is the family of the man he murdered. His mother, his wife, and his mother, his wife, his daughter, who had a mental breakdown after that, had a child out of wedlock just so she would have a child named for her father. This is a family that suffered since 1968. Well, we destroyed him in the Canadian media. Well, how did we do it? Not by saying he's a bad guy, but by showing his victims. I don't like to use the word victims. I usually like to use the word justice. Always be willing to use the human face to fight back, and then the people. You know, one of the things we want to do, and we're ready to do it. We just need the support to do it. There's lots and lots of Arabs suffering at the hands of UNRWA. Women who are forced into prostitution by UNRWA. I'm saying this on the record. If they want to sue me, I would be delighted. I subpoenas envy. Understand, that's from Abby Hoffman, I'm sorry. Anyway, but I'm sorry, I'm dating myself.
SDS.
Yeah, stop the war or de-escalate the bombing. But what I'm saying is, people are suffering in these refugee camps because of the U.S. government funding. And the Arabs who are suffering. So since the Arabs are suffering, that shows who's causing them to suffer. I'm telling you, this is the ultimate human interest story. And what Ben Dror was mentioning, the fact that the issue of the Jews who came from Arab countries is pushed aside. My identity in Israel was formed by my Yemenite roommate. He told me stories that I'm still living with today. Anyway, I'm just sorry because my host, Ira, is saying that there's not enough time for more questions. Again, let's stay in touch. I hope that the people here sign up. I'll send you a PDF of our book. If you can help our agency, I have a contribution form.
Do you
I have a business plan.
envelopes I can put this in?
No, I don't have the envelopes.
What do you have?
I just handed it. But the point is that you can mail it to my address there on my business card. Thank you for coming today, and you can see our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com. We're determined, against all odds, to get this story out. 29 years of working on it, we're starting to break through. Thank you.